Awesome, awesome, awesome. I will go first. Um, my name is Reverend Derek Terry. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've been doing this for over a year now. Started during COVID. I don't know about you, but I was spending lots of time at home reading. I love to read. And I thought, wouldn't it be awesome to get what I need from other humans and to discuss books? And so I said, let's start a book club and see how it goes. And it's been really fun. I see some familiar faces who have been to several, so it's always good to see you. I'm the pastor of St. Peter's United Church of Christ in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Pleasant Ridge. And this is probably the 10th time I've read this book, which is crazy. But I use it a lot when I present certain things, and it just really resonates a lot with me. So one word I would say is today. I reread it today, and it made me sad. Like there were a couple times I'm like sitting at my desk just bawling. So made me sad. I'll call on Dixie next.
Okay, I'm Dixie. I'm here in Gulf Manor, so not far from Pleasant Ridge. This is the second time I've read the book. I read it when it first came out. I felt like it was even more powerful this time after the spring and summer of last year. And I kind of had the same reaction, sad and frustrating.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We are discussing Between the World and Me. If you're just joining us, we're asking everyone to just give a name, where you're zooming from, and a word to describe how the book made you feel. What about Carol?
Carol Potterton, and I'm zooming from the Adirondack Mountains in New York. And, the book made me feel ignorant.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Carol. I think we're all jealous. At least I know I'm jealous of you, Adirondacks, right now. Lynette.
Hi, I'm Lynette Dean. I live in the Cincinnati area in the little town of Finneytown, and I'm a member of of St. Paul, St. Peter. Used to be a member of St. Paul. And the book. I guess I came up. It was with a question. Why does this keep happening? Why do we keep reliving the same stuff? That's not one word, but that's frustration and sadness. And when it was written in 2013, 14, and I was going through the names that he was listing, and I'm like, yeah. And then he talks about his friend, and we just not getting it right.
Absolutely. Chris or Christine?
Chris is good. I don't know how to change that. I'm Chris West. I live in Westchester, and this was my first time reading it, and I actually listened to it, and it was read by the author. And I felt sad and just kind of hopeless.
We always read these type of books, and people are like, when are we going to read a happy book? And we've read a couple of happy books. But this was pretty heavy. Thank you so much, Chris. Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha Veman. I'm zooming in from Anderson Township. This is the second time I've read the book. I was surprised at how little I remembered of it. And the way I felt is reading it, pained, and whatever the verb or whatever the grammatical equivalent would be of thought-provoked.
Awesome, thank you so much. Rosie?
Hi, I'm zooming in from Granbury, Texas. The book made me feel sad. And also my other thought, I'm concurrently was reading a book about the Ku Klux Klan trials after the Civil War. And I noticed a lot of overlap of, I don't want to say ideas, but an overlap there of how white people were, some white people were thinking about race. It was the same thing after the Civil War, and now it's the same thing here. So it seems like we haven't made a lot of progress, though we've made some, I believe.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Louise?
Hi, I'm Louise Lawari. I'm a friend of Martha's, also out here in Anderson Township. And I have read the book several times, but this time, like someone else mentioned, I've been listening to it. And the power of the insistence in his voice is leaving me very humbled. It's just, you know, I feel his emotion in his words more than I've done when I read it. So I'm feeling unable to say much at the power.
Awesome. It's a short read. It's a quick audiobook too, less than 4 hours. But the subject is so intense. It's not an easy read. So I've listened to it before as well. How about Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm zooming in from Pleasant Ridge. This was my first time listening to the book, a marathon. I'm a runner, so I have a lot of time to listen. And I agree, the author reading it's poetic, which is amazing. My one word feeling that I felt as I was listening to the book was kind of ashamed. I often felt ashamed, sad.
Awesome. I'm going live right now on TikTok. That's why I keep pausing, just to let people know we're discussing Between the World and Me, and we're just having everyone to introduce themselves. So we will get into the discussion. We only have a couple more introductions, and then we can talk about the book. What about Wynn?
Hi. I'm not driving, but I'm riding in Seattle, Washington. This is the first time I've finished the book. And every time it has made me feel ignorant. And this time it really made me feel childlike, because I'm childlike in what I know and what I hear from what he says to his child. I'm hearing it also as a child.
Hey, Timmy.
So, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Laurel, did I say that right?
Yes, I'm calling in from Canada, and I just found the book so powerful. I agree with what everyone has said so far. It was my second time reading it too, and it's horrible and tragic, and it's a struggle, but I would say it's also very powerful.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for doing that and for keeping it to a word. We have a nice small group, so we can all share as much as you would like. We just ask us a couple of ground rules, be respectful of everyone. Try not to monopolize too much of the time. It's an hour and a half and it goes by really, really fast. But we also want to make sure that we answer questions and that we can discuss some of these things. I've considered this race and social justice work as part of my ministry since the election of Donald Trump. If you know anything about my church, you know that we are multicultural, multiracial. We're Black, white, gay, straight, non-binary, cisgender, Republican, Democrat. We have all of these different groups that are individuals and families that are able to live in one small, we're not that big at all, one small congregation. And Martin Luther King used to say that high noon on Sunday was the most segregated hour in our country of the week. And that's very true. So we're able to survive in this way. And when Trump was elected, half my members had voted for him. Half my members were worried, is my marriage going to be dissolved? Is gay marriage going to be reversed? And what is it going to mean? And there were all these issues of race that hadn't been addressed. And we considered it our duty, at least I considered it my duty, to minister to everyone in the congregation, to get that information out there. I had a lot of Black friends that were saying, it's not my job. It's not my job to educate white people. And I completely get that. But when half your congregation is white and you're getting a salary, it kind of is. I felt like it kind of was my job. And so that's when we started doing this type of work. And we've really established ourselves as a safe place to have difficult and brave conversations. So I love that Ta-Nehisi in chapter 3 talked about waking the dreamers. And in reading the book, he refers to people who need to be white as dreamers. I would liken it to James Baldwin talking about the American dream being dead, and yet all these people are still believing in it. And I love that idea of waking the dreamers. And he tells his son, that's not your job. You have to be aware of it, but it's not your job. But I really do see part of my job is to helping people to understand so much of the history that we didn't get. So many truths that I think if we got, we would make better choices with our votes and with our policies and with how we treat people. And I consider it a moral obligation to do what is right for everybody, especially for the marginalized, the oppressed, the poor, or as James Cone would call them, the crucified peoples of the world. So my first question is, what do you think this book is about? And not everyone has to answer, but if there's something that compels you, usually this is what we do. We have a very conversational approach, but what do you think the book was about? If you have to describe the book to someone who hasn't read it and why they should read it, what is it about?
He's writing a letter to his son, and he has to address his son's feelings after, was it Tayshaun? What the man who killed him was acquitted, and he had to address that, and he did so very powerfully.
So I think it was Mike. It was either Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon.
I think it was Mike
Trayvon.
Brown.
Was it Mike Brown? I thought it was Trayvon.
I think so.
So he mentions all of them.
But it was all, yeah. It's, and a son is seeing this, and with our social media, it's so powerful that you see so much.
Anybody else? What do you think the book is about? He's writing a book. He's writing to his son. What else? What do you think the book is about?
How this keeps happening over and over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
I think about almost, he kind of keeps going back to what has changed and what stays the same. He often kind of says, things were different when I was growing up, but they're the same.
The idea of protecting his body and his son's body was so powerful throughout the whole book.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I guess I'd also say it's about innocence, his loss of innocence, and the insistence of white people on protecting their innocence so they don't have to understand the history that led to the lack of charges against Mike Brown's killer.
Good point.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So when I first read this book, why it caught my attention within those early pages, because I remember when Mike Brown's killers were acquitted, but I distinctly remember watching the prosecutor in the energy. You can see it on YouTube if that compels you. The energy of the prosecutor, as if he had an attitude that people were concerned about what was going to be happening to the killers of Mike Brown. Same way with George Zimmerman. I remember sitting on my couch. I hadn't lived in Cincinnati that long when that happened. And I just knew that George Zimmerman would be convicted. I mean, Trayvon had Skittles and Arizona tea. And the 911 operator told George, we don't need you to follow him. And he was 17. And so I just knew that now was the time where we would see justice. And so when it didn't happen, I was pissed and I was hurt. And I was like, but why? And then the same thing with Tamir Rice, 12 years old, playing in the park. Police pull up, just a few seconds later, he's dead. I remember sitting in a restaurant in Cincy, watching the video of Sam DuBose getting killed. And so that it hits in such a way that Ta-Nehisi understood exactly why his son said, oh, I have to go to my room. I have to, because it lands on you and you feel like there's nothing you can do. And Ta-Nehisi, being a Black male, understood what his son was going through. And he's feeling the feels for himself, but also knowing there's nothing he can do for his son. And that whole scene is so powerful and sad. And at the same time, it's normal in my community. Like, I remember during all the unrest last year, I had white friends who have children, and they're like, oh, I'm keeping my kids away from television right now. And I don't have any kids. My rule is, since I don't have kids, I don't tell people how to raise their kids. But I know growing up in my family, we would have never been shielded from that. It would have been on every TV. It would have been in the barbershop, at church. Like when Emmett Till was killed, that's all Black people talked about. When Trayvon Martin was killed, that's all Black people talked about. I remember being at Starbucks after Stephon Carter. He was the one killed in the backyard with a cell phone. And I went to Starbucks and these girls were laughing and giggling and buying coffee. And I remember thinking, how are they like cool right now? Like, because all of my friends, we're all like freaking out, right? And so we talk about between the world and me, that's what we're talking about, two different worlds. Like, there are times in our country when people are living in two completely different experiences. And it's heartbreaking, that scene. There were certain themes that came up a lot. The body, right? Taking your body and protecting your body. The struggle. He talked a lot about the struggle. Innocence. The protection of innocence. The theft of innocence, plunder, and dreams. What of those things, or any that I missed, stood out to you, or anything impact you or make you aware of something that you never thought about or never considered, or hit you hard, or stood out to you in any way? What about the whole idea of, oh, Lois, were you going to say something? You're on mute.
Here, I'm sorry.
There we go.
This whole thing, the whole book, played to me, because I listened to it, it played to me like a personal history for me, and a personal history for my family, my brother, how my brothers were treated, how I was sheltered, and his concept of not having a spiritual center kind of played an important part for me, because we were shielded in the church as well. I was very cloistered in the church and all of that, and shielded from even the community. Then when he goes into his experiences outside the home, of being exposed to different cultures and all of that, and realizing I have been in prison. And that was a statement that hurt very deeply as I read the book the first time. I think I've read it 4 times since you assigned it, because I just couldn't wrap my mind around everything at one time. Mm-hmm. But it was painful for me to go through all that and realize some of those comments that my brothers heard is, I'll beat you before the cops will. You know, I'll take you, if you cross the street, I will beat you back to life. And, you know, all those things were said to me one way or another for control. But the insidious part of that is the amount of fear in the community. And that comes from our parents trying to shield us, but it's still out of a fear existence.
Absolutely. In the last chapter, Ta-Nehisi said that he faced violence constantly within and without the home. And he wanted to ensure, and he did ensure, that his son wouldn't have to face that. And he talked about violence, his parents beating him as a tool, and he didn't talk about it as something like bad. He talks about it in a necessary way, that's what they believed. And it sounds even like he believed it. It's not what he believes for his son, but it protected him from what could have happened out in the streets. And then of course, violence in the community among his peers, and then violence that could happen from the police. And his son is raised in such a way that he's privileged from that, but at the same time, his Blackness still marks him for greater opportunities with the police and with others. Lois, did you have something? Or are you just signifying? That's a church wave. That's what Black people do when we're signifying. And so that whole idea of protecting the body from your parents spanking or beating you, because I'm either going to do this so that the police won't have to do it. And a lot of my friends and I were spanked growing up. And most of us don't see it as a negative thing. One of the reasons why I like this book so much is that so much of what, this is what we're reading, Between the World and Me, so much of what Ta-Nehisi talked about just rang so true to my Black experience growing up. What did you think about the time? This reminds me of the part in the book where he's in New York, the subway, his son is walking too slow. A white woman puts her hand on his son and says, "Come on," in a way of, basically hurry up. And he gets pissed. And it's the situation quickly escalated. He gets pissed. He says something to the white woman. A white man comes to her defense. He pushes the white man back. The white man says, "I can have you arrested." And Ta-Nehisi remembers, when he first responds, "I don't care." But then he remembers his son is watching him. And does he want one of the first memories of his son to be his father going off to jail? And then what happens to the son? And, there are all these things that goes through his head. And we know that if colors were different, that situation would have been much different. What do you think about that part? Or what were you thinking in those moments?
That white woman's callous disregard for a little child. And the fact that would not have happened if that child had been white. If it would have been, everybody would have been so angry at her for pushing the child that the whole scene would have played out very, very differently. But her callous disregard for the child simply because he was of color just burned my butt.
That may be today. That may be this moment. But that has happened so many times. So many times when people just disregard the fact that that child's parent was monitoring that child, and maybe the child wasn't moving fast enough for that person. But unfortunately, being a teacher today, and I've seen it happen, that the blatant disregard of people's humanity goes on. And even though we sit here, those of us that are conscious and trying to make a difference, it's still happening and it's unconscionable. And it made me angry. I've seen it happen. I've been afraid to do something about it because of my body. Mm-hmm. I have been afraid to defend. I have been to question or even debate with that person, why are you doing this? So it's just not an easy answer for me because I'm sitting here living in this body. And it goes on today.
And that's one of the things he talks about is it is heritage in this country to police, to control, to reprimand, to beat, to take Black bodies, brown bodies, poor bodies, female bodies. Like, there's this scale of who's worth more. He talked about at the close of the Civil War, Black people were combined $4 billion of value. That's how much they were worth, because they were bought and sold, and $4 billion. And so in Between the World and Me, he says, "I could have you arrested," which is to say one of your son's earliest memories will be watching the men who sodomized and choked and clubbed and broke do all of this to take you away. And he says, basically what he says is, I forgot for a second that I can't do that. I forgot that I can't make that mistake because our errors cost more. Like when we err, it costs more. And it used to really, one of the things he talked about that was part of my experience growing up was my parents constantly telling me, you have to be twice as hard, work twice as hard, study twice as hard to go half as far. And so I love the way he put it, because Ta-Nehisi says, to tell your kids they have to work twice as hard tells them that they're half as good. Because if everybody else gets to do this, and you're taught, I have to work twice as hard just to get half as much as my white counterpart. And so I love that he pushes back against that, but at the same time acknowledges that this world is not fair. Because you are who you are, because of this skin deep, this manufactured idea of race that our country has decided that will be the caste system here. I don't want you to believe that, but I do want you to be aware that exists. And our ancestors thought that was the right thing to do, right? They thought they were protecting us. They thought they were shielding us. Respectability was such a thing. Like if you just do what you're supposed to do, and if you dress the part, and if you carry yourself well. So for so long, so many of us just tried really hard. But Prince Jones came from the right family and went to the right schools and was articulate and handsome and had the nice car and did this and that and all. But it means nothing if you're in a racist society that sees your color as a threat and then justifies whatever it does to you. I mean, Tamir Rice was 12. We make excuses in this country to kill kids. Well, he was big. He was 12. like God, Lois.
Then what comes into play is when you dress right and look right and are assertive or improving, coming across as being ambitious, then comes the jealousy.
Right.
That comes into play. It is very difficult to balance your life, because then when you get put down for like that's what the Black church did a lot for us, is learning how to speak, learning how to be in public office or any of those things. But when you get into the community and start doing these things and being the best that you can be, it starts being a stripe on you of being, quote unquote, if old-timey words, of being uppity, and those issues. And please, I want to hear somebody's mouth besides mine and Derek's. I'm not trying to be bold, but I need to hear what other people are thinking after reading this book. I see your faces. I know you're contemplating things and hearing things, but you right here on this channel, this platform, have an opportunity to let each other know what we think, and how has this book changed anybody's concept or view of what has happened in our country now. Am I getting ahead of you?
You're
Dr.
okay.
Brother, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Can I add a thought to that experience with his son on the subway?
Yes.
I've heard in the case of Tamir Rice, of Michael Brown, how often the size, even when it's a small child, even when it's a 5-year-old child, how often suddenly that, especially young Black male, but I don't think it's specifically male, become older and larger and more threatening than they actually are. Adding age upon age to children, assuming the worst. There was a powerful story I heard of a woman who was presenting and talking about her 4-year-old Black child playing on a playground that was near a school, and the school used it. And when the kids came out for recess, white children looked at this 4-year-old Black boy and started to tell him that he had to get off the playground equipment. And one of the teachers came over and said, let's all get out of here before there's trouble. It's like, this was a preschooler. So there's that amplification in people's fearful minds of any Black body, no matter how young or small, is so much bigger and so much scarier.
Absolutely. That's something I had to deal with because I'm big. I was 5'10" in the 5th grade. I wore a size 13 shoe then. I was bigger than a lot of my teachers. And so my whole entire life, it's like W.E. Du Bois talks about the double consciousness. I'm aware of how I see myself, but I'm also aware of when I go into a space, how other people perceive me. If you ask Black people, if they're in a space, they can tell you how many Black people were in the room and where they sat. Because it's like when Ta-Nehisi talked about being a part of this world, like there's this whole culture, this whole world. He talked about picking up his luggage and bumping into another Black guy. And they had this whole exchange without even looking up. It's like Blackness is just dope. It's just dope as fuck. Like we're able to connect in a way through shared experiences. But it's also, I'm aware whenever I go into a space, I'm the biggest, Blackest thing in here. And on the one hand, I have a right to be here. I have a right to do whatever I need to do. I'm paying my money. I'm a citizen. But at the same time, a certain level of assertiveness can cause my death or harm. And that's the hard part. Did you have something, Alex?
Yeah. First, I just wanted to say, Lois, you're so much more knowledgeable than I am on the book and the content and the experience that I just love listening to you. So I'm happy to just hear you talk. But so I came to the book through my grandmother's hands. A book by a trauma therapist on essentially the trauma that's put onto the Black body in particular. And I kind of, any point in the book where you could kind of see where the symptoms of his trauma from growing up in a traumatic environment popped up, kind of like stuck out to me. So like he's in Paris and he's having this amazing time and he's having the best food and he's with this amazing person, but they're leaving the restaurant and he still has to make sure that he's in the back. Like he's got to walk him back. This other man has no idea, that that's something he's thinking about. He doesn't know, but he has to make sure that he sees the other guy across the corner and it happens throughout the book where you just see this man has experienced some really intense trauma. And those moments stuck out to me. And the book I'm reading right now is The New Jim Crow. And I just liked what Derek said about, I think it was Derek, I forget, somebody mentioned that, ever since, the history of America, there's always institutions, there's always rules, there's always societal pressure to develop a caste system. White people feel like there's got to be some way, they've got to work in some way to be superior, and back then he talks about in the 80s that it was crack. And then as we go, it's just keeps developing further.
Jess.
Was somebody talking? I heard someone.
I don't know where you fit up.
Maybe not. I wanted to go back to what Alex was saying about that scene in Paris. So they're in Paris. He's meeting with a white American or a white Parisian who wants to improve his English. He's Black American, wants to improve his French, and his guard is up the whole time. And the whole time he's like, if we leave this place, is he gonna go, he wants to take me to see this other building. Are we gonna go around the corner? They're gonna hit me on the head and take whatever I don't have. So it's so interesting because Alex called it trauma. And for me, that's just how I was raised and all my Black friends were raised. Like, I do not wear flip-flops out of the house because I was, and you know, some people think, oh, it's dangerous. That ain't why I was raised that you don't wear flip-flops because if you have to fight or if you have to run, flip-flops will impede either of those. And it's so crazy that I traveled to Texas not that long ago. And, you know, Texas is always hot, whatever part you're in. And it was a big deal. Like, oh, I want to wear flip-flops when I'm outside, but I'm going to be in Texas. And, you know, I'm going through all these things in my head. And I've said all that to say, I don't believe that my white counterparts are raised with that same level of always being on your guard. Like, and I didn't grow up, I grew up in a very charmed, comfortable, middle-class experience, but my parents were always telling me all these little things about always being prepared, always being on your guard. And so to this day, I mean, I'm a few years away from 40 and I don't like going out with flip-flops on. Like, so that's my question to the beautiful white people in the room. Like, did you see those instances in the book? Like, and what did you think about that? Or what was your experience? What were you told? Martha?
Yeah, there was something else you were saying earlier that called this to mind. The part where Coates is talking about living in New York and how he has to change his demeanor, the way he presents himself in the world as he passes from the neighborhood where he lives to riding on the subway to going to or whatever. I don't remember all the details, but for me that was eye-opening. I mean, I've been aware of weathering and how racism takes a physical toll on the health of people of color, especially Black people. But the way he described it, it suddenly became much more vivid to me. I think he talks about how exhausting it is, and that it just was so much more vivid. And so thank you, Derek, for sharing your experiences, because I don't want to forget this lesson.
Very good, thank you.
Anybody?
Can I it's Rosie. I just want to say that as a white woman, I have the great privilege of just being out and about and not feeling threatened most of the time. The only small taste I have of what I think Black people are feeling as a young white woman, my parents put in the fear to me to not be out at night alone. But other than that, I was, pretty free to travel about. And I didn't even realize the issues that the Black people were having till, my adulthood.
Anybody else? Any of those things stuck out in your head of just the differences? Yvonne?
I can relate very well. Of course, I can relate very well to what you're saying. I'm a lot older than you are. You're my son's age. And I can remember my parents as a young Black woman, or when I was a child, telling me about certain demeanor and the threat from white people, especially white men, if you're walking down the street. And I grew up in a middle-class environment too, a mixed neighborhood, but there was still that inherent threat there. So as time went on, I had to tell my son pretty much the same thing. He was always a big kid. He's 6'4" now and he weighs over 200 pounds. He's like,
that's me.
and yeah, and I had to tell him how to carry himself, how to dress, so he would be threatening, because even though he had a very baby face, he always has, and you do too, you're still considered by the color of your skin and your size as being a threat. And it's frightening, because even though my son is on his own now, I still worry about him. You know, who's going to do what to him?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the messed up part, is on the one hand, it's not fair, but on the other hand, you want your loved ones to come back home safe. And I love, did you get that in the book? Because he's constantly like, this ain't right, but this is the way it is. Lois, yeah.
There's just a constant level of, regardless of where you grow up. I was raised middle class here in Cincinnati. We moved so much, not just in Cincinnati. I started out in Oklahoma, but my family ran from all these things because we were in Oklahoma, we were in Texas, we were in New York, we were in all these places. And each time there was a lecture that was given to my brothers or was given to me. The whole essence of it was, you must survive. You must find a way to survive through the idiosyncrasies that are created by the life of being in this skin. In this skin. Mm-hmm. I can't change it. I can try to be different. We all try to be different because we try to be quote unquote educated, learn how to speak the way we can be understood, and negotiate life. But all of it is about survival and having your families come back to you. Thank you, everybody.
Dixie.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're in survival mode all the time, always. Which, as Alex said, is a traumatic experience over and over and over and over. It's like you're walking on eggshells all the time.
Absolutely. Louise?
He says early in the book, he says, race is the child of racism, not the father.
Yep.
And that seems in his continual conversation about the dream, about all of the different ways that that it's not individual people with their individual fears or concerns, that it's, and I'm speaking about white people now, but it's what has been constructed over, you know, in particular post-Civil War, all of the rhetoric and the cartoons and the advertising and the images that were on everything, that suddenly took the person who had been enslaved and made them either a terrible, scary person or a hypersexual person. Or all of these images have been ingrained in us, you know, for 150 years or more. Henry Louis Gates Jr. has a book that's filled with those images, it's called Stony the Road.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a piece that I hadn't understood, that the way that fear of a young child seeming bigger, or Michael Brown being like a monster, or you're able to shoot someone with a bullet, but you need a bigger bullet because 3 bullets won't take down this enormous, all of those narratives were constructed intentionally. And, you know, white America has absorbed them, but they were put there for a purpose. You know, and that purpose was to, you know, continue to other and now free Black people. So, and he doesn't back away from that ever, the systemic nature of racism.
And consider this, I love how honest the book is, but think of where he says this trauma, this pain, this weight comes from. So it comes from our country. I mean, he calls the role, like slaves were traded and sold from the White House, the very seat of power,
right,
from our country. They were owned. The slaves literally built the Capitol. Slaves was the wealth of our country at the time of the Civil War. So we get it from literally from our country, our institutions, right? Banking, the prison system, education system. We get it from our families, not as abuse, but as I have to, like, he talked about Black children being the only thing Black people have, and they're like obsessed with protecting their children. So you get it from there, you get it from your peers, right? Because you're in the world with people who have been traumatized in their homes and from traumatic experiences. And it just feels like you're constantly code switching. You're constantly trying to figure it out. You yourself, I love that he called it the struggle, what he called educating himself to be liberated from all of these things, or seeking to find questions or to answer questions. I want to read this portion of the book where he's talking to Prince Joan's mother. And that's one of the parts that made me cry. He's talking to his mother who's educated and done all the right things and yada, yada, yada. And he brought his son with him to this moment, 13 years old. And again, I know some of my white counterparts would think, oh, they're too young to see or to hear, but it's different, because when you're 13, like Louise has been telling us, they will pitch you at 16 or 17, like they pitch you older. But I love when she turned, she said, then the mother of the murdered boy rose, turned to you, Samari, his son, and said, you exist, you matter, you have value, you have every right to wear your hoodie, to play your music as loud as you want. You have every right to be you, and no one should deter you from being you. You have to be you, and you can never be afraid to be you. And maybe that was the son of the mother of the other person, I think. But anyway, you have every right to be you. And then he goes on to say, and I'm glad she said it, and if I haven't told you that, I apologize. And that just, it really stuck with me, because I remember one of the biggest arguments I ever had with my mother growing up was over me walking home from school in the rain wearing a hoodie. Because I was raised, you don't wear a hoodie, because my father's a cop. It's like 9 out of 10 suspects are Black, male, tennis shoes, jeans, hoodie. And my mother sees me walking home, she's driving home, I have on the hoodie, she rolls down the window, take that hoodie off, she keeps driving, right? Because she doesn't want me to get wet in her car, right? But then, so it's just raining. And if you wear glasses, rain is the worst thing for glasses, because there's just, so anyway, I get home, I'm like, mother, what was that about? Why didn't you give me a ride? She's like, oh, you were all wet, and didn't want you to mess up my car. And then she was like, did you take that hoodie off? I was like, no, it was raining. And she got so mad, because she just got so mad. And we went back and forth, and I just kept saying, I didn't do anything. Why am I in trouble when I didn't do anything? It's raining. That's the whole point. That's why I like hoodies, because they keep you warm. You got the pocket on the belly, you get cold, you put the hoodie on. But in her mind, it was so dangerous. And I just love that woman took the time to look at his son and say, don't believe all of that. You matter, you have a right, you should be able to exist. And the sad thing is, it's still dangerous. It's still dangerous.
Derek?
Yvonne?
You know, there's a couple of things. One of the ladies mentioned, you know, I'll go back to that point because it's slipping my mind. But what you're saying is that as a parent, you want your child to live. And so, you know, there is a dress code. You know, you have every right in the world to do whatever you want to do. But the fact is that it could put you in danger, and she wants to hold on to you as long as she can. And I really drummed that into my son. So, you know, he's gotten to the point, he's 36, he does not wear tennis shoes unless he's walking his dog. And as a rule, he wears slacks, he doesn't wear jeans. And, you know, he he's not a conservative person, but he dresses conservatively because he knows how people react to him. And, you know, we used to live, he's still down in Oakland. And, you know, he walks his dog all over the place. And so far, nobody's bothered him, but he has to always be on guard. And I live in Benicia, California, which is about maybe 30 or 40 miles away. And it's a predominantly white neighborhood. I feel comfortable in my house and in my immediate neighborhood, but you know, I'm looking over my shoulder constantly because I don't know what these people are thinking. I don't know whether, I hope I'm not offending anybody politically, but I don't know whether they're Trumpites, how they feel about Black people. I'm not a threat, but some people don't need us to be a threat, you know? And I'm gonna go back to that other point that I was gonna make. We can't fix this problem. You know, white people have to be engaged, train their children. Don't wait for the schools to teach you about Black history and what happened in the United States.
Yeah.
Go to, if you have to, Amazon, go to Black bookstores, go anywhere and get books and educate your own kids. Yeah, for their well-being as well as ours, because the younger people are the ones that are, well, there's some older people that have very liberal ideas towards us, but the younger people are the ones that have that obligation to change the world. And it's our obligation to teach our children.
That was the perfect segue, because I wanted to segue these last 25 minutes to something that I think we can all relate to, and that's Ta-Nehisi's work. He called it his struggle to educate himself on these issues, because I do this here, and I do Race, Rage, and Fear, and I do all these type of things so that people can learn. And I fervently believe that the more we know, the better citizens we make. I believe that, you know, for a lot of people, ignorance is bliss. Not knowing makes the world so much easier. But then once you've learned something, it's really hard to unknow it. I mean, you may not like it, you may want to push it back, you may want to reject it, but once you learn it, and it's so important, and I'm reading from, if you have the hardback book, page 96, the fact of history is that Black people have not, probably no people have ever liberated themselves strictly through their own efforts. In every great change in the lives of African Americans, we see the hand of events that were beyond our individual control, events that were not unalloyed goods. In other words, it like Yvonne said, and like James Baldwin would always say, and Martin Luther King would always say, this is not a Black problem. This is an American problem. Mm-hmm. And so racism is an American problem. Sexism is an American problem. Classism is an American problem. And consumerism, all of these evils create this caste system that keeps the haves and the have-nots, and that completely separates us from the quote unquote American dream. And so his education was going to Howard, going to the library, and sitting down with books regularly, and reading and learning and liberating his mind from the experience of his childhood. And it set him on the path to be who he is today. I mean, he got one of the MacArthur Genius Fellowships. And for a non-college graduate, he writes way better than I do. It's so if you're here, I would argue you are on a path that you're learning. You're trying to figure out some things. And so how did you relate to that in the book? And what did you think about his journey? Or I love that he called it his struggle.
I felt like it was a beating. Again, I felt like the book was a beating for me as a dreamer. That it was giving me. I would never presume to say I was awakened, but it brought my consciousness up so much that my struggle, it was like the beginning of my struggle with myself. And I wholeheartedly agree that this is an American struggle. And it just brought my consciousness up of what kind of struggle it is. Because, I'm child of the 60s, blah, 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 but it continues and is brought more to me. The Black Lives Matter saying that you're hiding Black Lives Matter from your children. I was just overwhelmed by that people would hide the struggle from their kids because it wasn't them. And
absolutely. Mm-hmm. What else? What do you think about that? His education, that struggle, Dixie?
One of the things I'm eternally grateful for is that my family didn't care what I read as long as I read. And that I would go to the library and pick out whatever I wanted to read and read it. And they didn't, they had no opinion about it. So when I was 12, I read all of James Baldwin. And that has really affected my whole life in my social justice consciousness. And like I said, I'm very grateful that I read that at a very young age, because it did enable me to see things that maybe other people weren't seeing. And I'm still, I'm still learning and still progressing, but I'm happy that I started early, basically, and then went to a high school that was very, very mixed. I went to Woodward at the time, back in the 60s. And, that was different too, because it wasn't all segregated like a lot of places were. So I'm still learning. I'm still learning more. But I'm grateful for the learning.
And what Ta-Nehisi in the book said, that learning this information is hard as hell. It's hard, it's accusatory, it's like, it's heavy, it's not easy. James Baldwin in I Am Not Your Negro, they compared, he compared real life for Black people with Doris Day movies, right? Yeah. So, Doris Day, she had the fly little house, and you're walking around in the pearls and the gown, and, oh, should I kiss him? Yes or no? That's completely different than, it's completely different from the Black American experience. And it's not until a lot of us grow up and we realize white people ain't living like that either. Yeah. Right. So much of my education around people has just been doing stuff like this and hanging out with people. I used to think white people were like the Andy Griffith Show. You know, there's homemade pie every day. You sit on the porch, play the guitar, sing a song. Like, so that whole idea of the American dream being dead, that's some real stuff. So if the struggle is so hard, why are you all learning this stuff? Why are you trying to do this? Like, what, Lynette?
So, you know, the phrase, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you start learning it, you can't unlearn it. And there, even though I feel like I'm really new to this, even though I was, you know, I'm a product of the 60s, and I thought I knew what I knew, but I don't know what I know. You know? And so it's the need for me to learn the history that I was never taught, to see my kids know things that I never knew, and they didn't get it in school either. I mean, they're on their journey. It's neat. It's a necessary, painful journey for me.
It's the only way the United States is ever going to come to any kind of reconciliation, because we've ignored it for so long that the painful truth has to be told.
Martha?
The gilded cage is still a prison, and it never satisfied me.
I love that. I love when he said America, or someone, I don't know if it was his quote or someone else's that he quoted in the book, talking about America being closer to Rome than we think. And how the best years of America are probably behind us. And the fact that we're oblivious to the fact that it's probably behind us. And then he goes on to even talk about, you know, look at the way we treat humans, but look at the way we treat our planet. Like, we're exploiting all of these things as if, with blinders on, as if everything is just going to work out. And so that whole idea of American exceptionalism, that whole idea of, because I have power and money, then everything else, you know, I can do whatever the heck I want. And it's
to hell with the next generation.
Yeah. Or if the truth doesn't benefit me, then freak the truth. And it's like that's why great empires have fallen, is because they became oblivious. I mean, when Marie Antoinette says, let them eat cake, it's because she was so disconnected from what her subjects, the lives that they were living. And it's really like, look at the world, and there's such a huge disconnect from, I mean, if you're poor in this country, $5 may as well be 5 million. Like, if you don't have it and your circle doesn't have it, like if I need $500, I have 10 people I can call. And if I can get $500 from 10 people, I can ask those 10 people for $50 and get my $500. There are millions of people in our country who can't do that. And I think a lot of us in our privilege, and that's why I love Ta-Nehisi keeps telling his son, you are privileged, but you are not far from these facts, from these truths, and you need to know this. So in other words, don't ever think of yourself as above these individuals. And of course, we talk a lot about race, but again, in our country, class, and it's also gender. I mean, I have male privilege, and as a gay man, I I can pass as hetero privilege. Like there are all these things that this whole spectrum of privilege, that if you're not in that community, the struggle is siding with that oppression, like choosing to be uncomfortable because it's what's better for our world, what's better for our planet. And there are certain things that we have to deal with. If you're a female, you always have to deal with your femaleness, right? But as a male, I get to choose. Do I side with, or do I just stand back? And I think that the world has changed when people could be silent and could be comfortable, but choose not to be. Say, nope. And you do that because I'm not a female, but I have 3 beautiful nieces that I love to life. And I want the world to be a better place for them. And it's just the right thing to do. So I always love when people put their comfort aside, because that's who changed the world. And when we think about abolitionists, they literally risked their lives, lost their lives to bring about change. We look at the civil rights movement. It wasn't just Black people marching. There were white people. There were Jewish people. There were all different brown and famous people and immigrants putting their lives on the line to help bring about change in our country. And that's what we're obligated to do. Anything else stand out, or any questions, Louise?
Well, I was just talking more about where we are right now. There's I don't know if you've been in the Holocaust and Humanities Center here at the Museum Center. Mm-hmm. And there's a beautiful film at the beginning that's the introduction to the museum. And as they are kind of setting up the rest of the experience, they're talking about the Hitler's beginnings and his beginning to vilify and remove privileges in particular from Jewish people. Mm-hmm. And there's a line that captured me that just I can't get rid of, and it is, the German people were making choices. Mm. And I watch where we are today. Our school district in Anderson is battling the critical race theory challenge, but our state legislature is doing it too. We're working hard to remove people's voting rights. And we know that it's a political game to garner more and more power. But it's being done. When I've listened to the parents who are talking to our school board, they have absorbed the messages and they're afraid. And so, I hear fear from them. And I think that's the same thing with the German people. They were afraid, and now we're afraid, but it's easy to manipulate people who are afraid. And it seems to be fairly easy to make people afraid. So I guess that's my concern right now, because as you talk about where are we in relationship to Rome, just, how long can we hold on if we're destroying what we teach our children and we're destroying our right to vote? So I feel like we're making choices.
That's perfect. Alex, did I see your hand earlier?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you mentioned just like what brings you back to like spaces like this. And the thing that always goes through my head, so I'm a music therapist, and I've worked with many different like groups of people, many different populations. And the thing that I always run into, like for instance, for a while I worked with people with addiction. And the thing that I always come back to is like, you hear the things that they've done and the things that they do. And, when I'm talking about it with my friends, often people come at it with like judgment, like, oh, they're such awful people. Or I work with people with developmental disabilities, and like, oh, and there's the teasing and the jokes. And I always just come back to like, you're no better than them. You're not better than them, you know? Or, you know, say somebody with schizophrenia, that we think it's funny that they hallucinate. And I always think, you're not better than them. And I think growing up as a white male, even I had a very progressive dad, but you know, your first instinct when you hear stories like Ta-Nehisi Coates as a white man, the first instinct is, oh, it can't be that bad, right? And you hear it over and over, and you see it over and over on the news, and you think, why am I in this place? Because I'm no better than them, you know? And it just comes back to that, like, you know, I'm not better than them, so why is this happening? So you feel like something's got to happen, you know, change has to come about, you know.
I love that. And
I hope so.
Unfortunately, a lot of people are raised to believe that they are inherently better. I mean, that's exactly what racism is. In the beauty of educating ourselves is that we learn the myths, right? Like we learn the propaganda. We learn that just isn't true. And it's really, really, really powerful once you understand that as a human, I cannot be any more or less human than another human. But then that also means that other humans cannot be more human or less human than I am. And that if anything affects or impacts one human, it could impact me. And no matter how good I am, no matter how smart I am, at the end of the day, I still have the capacity as a human to do really ugly things. And no matter how many ugly things another human can do, I believe there is still the capacity within them to do good things. And that's why I spend so much time trying to work to educate people. People come to things like these, it's the choir, right? You're coming to get more knowledge of something you already believe. I have talked to groups that were not the choir. they were, so I couldn't go anywhere near as deep as we go today. But what I can do is provide information and chip away at stuff, right? Like, okay, this is what you were taught. Ta-Nehisi talked about most of us did not learn the Civil War. I mean, we know that we went to war and we knew that it was bad and it was a civil war, but what were most of us taught that the Civil War was fought over? States' rights. Yep.
No, I was taught slavery. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, because most, we'll talk about, you know, the economic side of it. People will talk about the states' rights side of it. We'll talk about the expansionist side, you know, Democrats, Republicans deciding what happens with the new states as we expanded west. But my Civil War knowledge in high school, or what I learned in high school, was very short. When we did World Civ, we talked a lot more about the Revolutionary War, about World War II, and about Vietnam. We even went to the Vietnam Memorial. Like that was part of our work. It wasn't until college that I read the Succession Papers and understood it was literally the war of slavery. It was literally Black people fighting to get out. And Ta-Nehisi talked about going to memorials. And while going to those memorials, like people looking at him as if he's like, he shouldn't be there almost. Because Black people don't always go to Civil War plantations to learn about the Civil War. And he has a really good article that I would suggest he wrote it in the Atlantic years and years and years ago. It is, I think it's called like Why Black People Don't Study the Civil War. And he makes an argument why we should. And I love his Atlantic articles because, the Atlantic lets you write words and words and words and words. And it's probably about 12 or 13,000 words. But it's really, really, really good. And I would encourage, I'm a history buff, currently studying history. I would encourage people to learn as much as you can about the Civil War, because I'll tell you, so much of Civil War and the failure of Reconstruction is the foundation of the country we have right now. Like,
it's still being fought.
It is still being fought. If the Revolutionary War established our country, the Civil War was a second revolution. I mean, and so many of our thoughts, beliefs, political system, institutions are the response of the Civil War, the response of, and every single time. So the Civil Rights Movement, our politics is based on in response to the Civil Rights Movement. Look at what's going on with voting right now. It's in response to the last election. And so that's why I think it's important for us to do stuff like this, because we learn and we grow and we get information, and we also realize, okay, I'm not the only one who feels frustrated, who feels sad, who feels hopeless, and which kind of brings me hope. Last thoughts, as we have 1 minute left. Anyone? Miss Yvonne?
I'm glad to sit in on this review, and there's I'm encouraged because there's so many white people that are here, and I think it's great because you can go and talk to your people and talk to your relatives, your children, and educate them, because it's your responsibility to do that. And Derek, one of the points that you made about propaganda, America has been propagandized ever since America started. And our whole existence is based on a lie. The United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all of it is basically a lot of flowery words from some intellectual people that were very smart. You can't deny that, but they were very corrupt. Land of the free, home of the brave, equal rights, equal protection under the law. That's not true. And, of course.
Never has been.
No. And, Black people are getting most of the brunt, but poor whites, Mexicans, Native Americans, basically, they've all been screwed over. So what hurts us as a group of minority people hurts whites too. When they cut out welfare and helping all these programs that help people through the pandemic, the Republican Party doesn't want to pay that out to help people keep from starving and staying in their houses. It not only hurts Black people, it hurts white people. There's more white people in the world in the United States than there are us. And so you have to fight for your rights and your children's rights. It's not just fighting for Black people, although we're all in this boat together.
Yeah,
we really are.
Absolutely. I'm going to put a couple of, thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat. The first is my Patreon link. I'm doing a study right now of one of my favorite books, The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I'm going chapter by chapter, so it's 15 weeks. And each video is about 30 minutes. And I compare what he was talking about when the book was published in 1903 with what's going on right now in 2021. It is for Patreon. There's different levels, so it is a patronage or a donation, but the cheapest is only $3. So if you're interested in helping with this type of stuff, or with seeing those videos, and then there's other things, every week I upload all kinds of stuff that is just like this. So I have that there, and then ReverendDerek.com is my website, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and now TikTok at Rev Derek Terry. So I'll put all that in there. Any other questions before we close out? Twitter, YouTube, Insta.
What's the next book, Derek?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So it's called, let me make sure I get the name right. Because I keep getting the name wrong. So that's why let me pull it up. Oh man, I think it's called The Gilded Ones. I thought I had my
The Gilded Ones.
The Gilded Ones. And most of the books that we've read have been written by young women of color, which I think is awesome. And this is the same. It's a young adult fiction. I kind of fell in love with young adult fiction over the pandemic. It's just it's not what I thought it was going to be. So I just love those coming of age, those strong female characters. And it's called The Gilded Ones by Naimina Forna. I'll put that in the chat too. So you will have that.
I finally finished Jane Crow, the autobiography of Polly Murray. If anybody has a lot of time to read a really great history book, which is what I realized that it was.
What's it called?
Jane Crow, the autobiography of Polly Murray. Yeah. It was written by, seems like her last name was Roseland. Mm-hmm. But I can't quite remember. There is only one copy of it in the Cincinnati Public Library. So,
oh my.
Yeah, one copy.
Yeah, that's why we didn't read it, because it was hard to find. It wasn't on audio book, and it's super long.
Mm-hmm. But it is so worth reading. I thought I knew a lot about the women's movement. Nothing. I knew nothing.
That's really interesting. I'll show you what I'm reading now, and then I'll let you go. So this is Bearing the Cross, Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It's kind of thick.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big book.
It really is. A lot of it, there's a lot of like references, and there's a bibliography, and there's an index that take up almost 100 pages. So, and they're like chapter notes. So it's not all, this is like the index and bibliography and chapter notes and all the extra, but it's
still pretty thick.
It's pretty thick. It's really good though, and it's fast paced, and won a Pulitzer. And it just really tells the story of organizing, like how the SCLC and Dr. King organized to bring about the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and it's pretty dope.
And who wrote it?
So it's written by David Garrow, who's a pretty big historian. He's written lots of stuff.
I have to go. Thank you, Derek.
All right, take care.
Always wonderful.
All right, thank you all so much. And yeah, take care. And if you signed up for this one, you'll get emails about the next book club. Take care. Peace.
Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, bye-bye.